Ahora vamos con un panel sobre el contexto europeo y global. Y me gustaría que subiese al escenario Ana Zongojovic, de la Red Global de Aprendizaje de GAN, que está, Ana está con nosotros. Sí, ya la veo ahí. Y conectaremos en directo ahora con el señor Tamás Barnay, de la Comisión Europea, y Katarina Jaik, de Digital Bet, que creo que los tendremos en un momento en imagen. Así que, Gonzalo, cuando quieras comenzar este panel, en un momento tendrás en imagen a los otros dos componentes y continuamos.
Bueno, muchas gracias.
Gracias por tu moderación, que está...
Muchas gracias, Jota. Vamos a seguir en temas de cooperación, vamos a seguir en temas de fortalecimiento, sinergias entre actores y entre países. Para eso vamos a comenzar este panel. En primer lugar, el panel que lleva por título el marco de cooperación de la Unión Europea. Si bien el título es ese, el marco de cooperación de la Unión Europea, el panel no se va a restringir a la cooperación dentro de Europa, pero sí, sin duda, que lo europeo va a tener un elemento a lo largo de todo el panel. Tenemos, en primer lugar, con nosotros a Tamás Barnay, que es responsable de política de formación de la Comisión Europea. Hello, Tamás. Welcome. Nice having you. I will start by asking you to explain, to describe to us the background and context of what is the European Framework for Quality and Effective Apprenticeships, the reasons behind its adoption, main elements and features.
Good evening and welcome, and thank you very much for the invitation. And I have to apologize because something happened with the interpretation, and until recently I had it in English and now it's changed to Spanish, so I am afraid I missed the question.
Are you hearing me now, Tamás? Just nod, please, if you're hearing me. Okay, so the question was, I was asking you to give us a little bit of background about the European Framework for Quality and Effective Apprenticeships. So, to tell us the reasons behind its adoption, the main elements of this framework and its features. I hope you got the questions now.
Gonzalo, so now everything is clear. So maybe I would start saying that it's mostly in the past 10 years that apprenticeships are quite high, let's say, on the European Union agenda. And if you count back 10 years, you will see that the beginning of the previous decade, we were still within the 2008 crisis with a very high youth unemployment rate. So actually in Europe, the crisis was longer, let's say, or at least in some parts of Europe it was much longer. So in countries like Spain or Greece or Italy, we had really very high youth unemployment rates. And at the time, we realized that there is a negative correlation between youth unemployment rates and the development of apprenticeship schemes. Of course, it may not be the only reason if apprenticeships are well developed that youth unemployment is lower, but definitely that's a factor, an important factor. So it became much more attention, and there is another entry point that I would mention, and this is that we are facing a huge diversity of national vet systems in Europe. And of course, it's not only a European thing, so I think that it is everywhere the case that national vet systems are different, but Europe the EU is a single market, so it's very important that we have a free movement of labor among the four liberties. And for that, it makes a lot of sense to ensure some convergence between apprenticeship schemes. So this is as a starting point why this idea of a European framework for quality and effective apprenticeships came up. And of course, we should also say that it's very clear that apprenticeships are an excellent way to help school-to-work transition, but only if they are of sufficient quality, which is the common interest of the apprentice and of the employer. So to come to the substance, in 2017, the European Commission made a proposal for a Council recommendation on this European framework for quality and effective apprenticeships. And it provides, first of all, a common definition. So now we have, let's say, a European definition of what are apprenticeships. And then it sets minimum standards, 14 minimum standards, 7 for learning and working conditions. So this is what has to be respected at the workplace, which includes, for example, that there should be a contract, that there should be a company trainer, that the trainer has to be properly trained. 50% of the time should be spent at the workplace, and of course the working conditions have to be respected, and an apprentice has to be paid. And then there are 7 other conditions which we call framework conditions, which is more about the overall framework. That social partners have to be involved in the establishment of apprenticeship schemes, that career guidance has to be ensured, quality control has to be ensured, things like this. So the Commission proposal is from 2017, and less than a year later, so in spring 2018, in the Council, all member states signed up for this initiative. So this is, as I said, is in a form of a Council recommendation, which means that legally it's not binding, but as you see, there is a lot of political will behind it. And just this year, we have been publishing a report on implementation. So now we are 3 years into the implementation of the framework, and we can see that there is a lot of positive development. So in many member states, indeed, apprenticeships are now of better quality than they were 3 years ago.
About cooperation, regional cooperation in Latin America, in the Caribbean. So we would like to take this topic now to you, Tamás, and ask you about the European Alliance for Apprenticeships. This alliance, what it is, what kind of activities it carries out, and what kind of benefits you think it brings about to the members.
So the European Alliance for Apprenticeships is a very interesting initiative. This actually preceded the quality framework that I was talking before. So this is an initiative of 2013, first initiated by the European level social partners, so trade unions and employers. But then very quickly national governments and other actors stood behind. So basically we have 38 countries who signed up for it. And within the years, over 360 pledges have been made by other stakeholders, and those stakeholders include regional governments or cities, vet providers, of course, very important, chambers, youth organizations, think tanks, I mentioned social partners, and the objective is to work together to enhance the supply, quality and image of apprenticeship. So that's the original objective. I mentioned the member states who make national commitments, which are usually about apprenticeship reforms in their country. And I also mentioned that we have by now 38 countries, so it's not only the EU members, but most countries in Europe, in geographical Europe, have adhered to this. And in the years, mobility of apprentices, so international mobility of apprentices became a fourth objective. So I mentioned the supply, which means that more apprenticeships, quality, the image, because, well, it's a problem everywhere, unfortunately, the image of VET in general and apprenticeships should be improved, and then transnational mobility, which again, I would like to underline that in Europe, it's in the European Union at least, it's a very important issue. I think you asked the advantages for the members. We have regular meetings of this alliance, and before COVID, it meant 4 or 5 meetings per year, which were, of course, face-to-face meetings. Unfortunately, in the past 1.5 years, we have almost only video meetings, which is not the same. Why is it a problem? Because, of course, also with the video meetings, members can learn from each other, and they can exchange on best practices, but these meetings are also an excellent opportunity to network, to build your network, and that's, of course, a bit more difficult in this context. And what I would like to mention is that in the past 2 years, we also have set up a kind of a secretariat, or even I would call it a technical support service. So this is the apprenticeship support services, which is providing a lot of services to our members. And these are online training courses, webinars, live discussions, even online networking opportunities. Actually, many of these are not only limited to our members, so they are open, and I invite you to consult the website of the European Alliance for Apprenticeships, because I am sure that you can also take advantage of some of those services.
Muchas gracias por acompañarnos, Tamás. Voy ahora a pasar a conversar con nuestra invitada Anna Songolovic, jefa de programas en GAN. Vamos a hablar en inglés porque ella me pidió que lo hiciéramos así que con mucho gusto, Anna, vamos a complacer a la visita. So, to begin with, I would like to ask you what the GAN network is, and how it works, and what kind of activities it carries out.
Okay. Can everyone hear me? Yes. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being so graceful with me. I could have done this in Spanish, but I'll be a lot more eloquent in English. So the Global Apprenticeship Network was created after the financial crisis of 2008, when the conversation turned to youth unemployment quite frequently. In particular, the conversations that took place during the G20, B20 discussions in 2012. And in 2013, following a study that was funded by the ILO called the feasibility study, a decision was made to launch what they call the Global Apprenticeship Network. The basic idea was that companies that are interested in providing in-company training, that are interested in apprenticeship, would come together to share lessons, to promote the concept to companies that haven't bought into it as yet. And somehow, through their prestige and through their standing, they would make this a much more popular concept throughout the private sector, not just in the countries where this is already very popular and well established, but also in countries where obviously there was an interest from the public sector, but not necessarily the participation from the private sector. That was the basic idea. Now, what happened throughout the years is that the very word apprenticeship doesn't necessarily translate very well in some languages, especially where there's no culture of what we mean by apprenticeship. And when I use the term as per the ILO definition, which is very much based on what the dual education system considers apprenticeship to be. So what we found is that in many countries where we would work, people would use the word apprenticeship quite loosely, but what they meant was an internship or a traineeship or just a basic training of a few weeks. And we said, this is not what this is. So at some point, the Global Apprenticeship Network, I guess in a way, lost its way or expanded its mission and started talking about work-based learning. So we started to go a little bit beyond apprenticeship. But I think we are now coming back to the very concept of the quality apprenticeship, and we'll be maybe changing also the terminology to dual education. But so maybe I'll stop there and I'll ask you. Yes.
So what kind of initiatives do you have in this region, or not in this region, in that region?
Latin America. Okay.
In Latin America, exactly.
So this is the star region actually for the Global Apprenticeship Network. We have very motivated focal points in various countries and great work being done. So perhaps just to go back to how the Global Apprenticeship Network is structured. At the global level, so in Geneva, where we are headquartered, we have companies that come together and form the board, and they are supposed to be pushing the topic. And we thought what we will do is that we will go to other countries and replicate this model at the national level through a host organization. So at the very beginning, the idea was that the host organization would be an employer federation. So ANDI in Colombia, CACIF in Guatemala, UCAEF in Costa Rica, UIA in Argentina. And this is mostly how we have operated, through these employer federations that already had a lot of employers on board, and we thought we'll just use that network and we'll pin the mission onto it. And we had a lot of buy-in from these particular federations. Now, has it worked? Yes and no, in a sense that a network within a network is a difficult thing to do. But the topic is always relevant and companies are still interested. But maybe what we've noticed is that people are asking us to do things a little bit differently. Now, we had funding from the US Department of Labor to do work in two specific countries in Latin America. One was Costa Rica and one was Argentina, two very different contexts. In Costa Rica, we were very lucky because during the life of the project, the dual education law was approved. So all of a sudden, our mission became, how do we implement it? What do we tell the private sector? How do we make this a reality with the private sector? So one of the biggest outputs and I guess outcomes of this project is that we created what we call the Business Assistance Center on Dual Education. And this is still very much in its infancy. We launched it 2-3 months ago. But the idea is that this particular center will act as an intermediary between the National Apprenticeship Institute and companies interested in hosting apprentices. And what we will help them do is align the practical training and the theoretical training of young people. So our role will be to basically mediate between these two worlds and say, okay, this is great what you're teaching, this is great what you're training on, but let's make sure that this aligns and that this results in a qualification, not just a skill, that is useful in the labor market. So I think this is something that we'd like to replicate in other countries because we find that this is going to be useful. In Colombia, we have had other activities funded by companies. For example, we focused a lot more on digital competencies. And I think I'd like to make a point here that, and this was made by other speakers and it came through what others said, is that we see a difference between skills or what we would call competencias and qualifications, right? Because sometimes the two terms are used interchangeably, yet, you know, a qualification is more a piece of paper and a skill is more something that you can do. So when we talk about, for example, digital skills, this is something that has been coming to the apprenticeship network a lot, and people have asked us, how do we do digital apprenticeships, or how do we introduce the digital component into a physical apprenticeship? How do we train for digital jobs? And one of the first things that we do is ask, what kind of digital skills are you looking at? Because there are the basic ones and there are the very complex ones, you know. Teaching somebody to create algorithms, to code, to write software is not the same thing as teaching somebody to operate a machine that requires some digital skills but not very complex ones, right? And for example, when you look at the more extreme end of the spectrum where you have software developers or data scientists, you probably actually need quite a lot of university preparation for that. You need a lot of math, you need a lot of logical thinking, you need a lot of statistical knowledge to be able to do that. This is not something you can do on LinkedIn Learning in 5 weeks. I mean, you can maybe complement your education doing that, but this is not something that you can just figure out on your own. But there are other things which you can learn much more quickly. So in a way, our mission has shifted over the years. Our story is simple and complicated at the same time, as you know, but what we do really focus on is trying to encourage the private sector to take on dual education, to become involved, and to understand that this is not just a chore, this is not just something that they should do, this is something that is good for them. And here is where we come in as this sort of honest broker and teach the private sector and the public sector the language that they should speak to each other. The public sector reacts to a different set of arguments. The private sector is always looking for profit, they're looking to cut costs, they're looking at the bottom line, and this is very important in particular when we speak with small and medium enterprises who often tell us we simply cannot afford this. So again, our role is to say, okay, well, how do we help the Costa Rican government to talk to the private sector and make this a reality and convince more companies to come on board? And then how do we teach, for example, TVET institutions or schools which might be a little bit reluctant to work with companies, that this is also great for their students?
Okay, Anna, thank you very much.
Welcome.
And it was a pleasure also developing these studies, these regional comparative studies on the legal frameworks for quality apprenticeships together with GAN, and certainly we have a very nice publication coming up very soon. So